You're listening to the Dead Padawans Society, a science fiction and fantasy podcast celebrating the ideas, mythologies, and truths in iconic works of sci-fi. I'm your host, Brett Inman, joined by my friend, Nick Dennis.
Hello, everybody. This is episode 4. You may see it as episode 1, but it's not. It's episode 4.
Can they expect episodes 1, 2, and 3?
Well, those will come later.
Oh, really? Like 20 years from now, we'll be
Yeah.
episodes 1,
It'll
2,
be
3?
fine.
It'll probably be great, right?
It'll be, oh yeah, the audio effects on it will be much better than what we have right now, but altogether it'll be disappointing.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
Well, we're introducing this new podcast that you are listening to, we are going to do a little bit of introductions between myself and Brett, and then we're going to be jumping into our first introductions into sci-fi, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the core of what we believe is sci-fi, what we love about it, and then from there, springboarding off into all kinds of topics that you'll get to hear in the coming episodes.
Sweet. I'm excited about this because I'm a longtime lover of science fiction, so looking forward to it. By the way, I love the name that you came up with for the podcast. Where did this drop out of the heavens into your lap at?
Well, I was watching the Dead Poets Society randomly. I was like, oh yeah, I haven't watched this.
Which is a great science fiction film.
It's a fantastic science fiction film. You know, of course, Robin Williams doing his best work, you know. He was completely CGI'd the entire time. You know.
Wait, he's the robot though from Bicentennial Man, right? In that it's the same character, isn't it?
No, he was the alien from Mork and Mindy. That's what.
Oh,
did I say Mork and Mindy?
Yeah.
So no, yeah, he was that, and he becomes a teacher.
Gotcha,
That's what it is.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that had you thinking about science fiction.
Exactly. But no, I was watching that movie because I hadn't seen it in like a decade, and I was like, yeah, it's a pretty good movie, you know. And you know, these kids get so excited about poetry. Poetry's great. There's nothing wrong with poetry.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, I really love, you know, sci-fi. And I love, you know, the whole idea of the movie is digging deeper into, you know, poetry and the creators, the poets themselves, and then that, you know, coming into their own lives and affecting them and changing their worldviews and things like that. And I was like, well, I don't really like poetry that much, but I love sci-fi, and I think sci-fi has been a huge impact on my life, and it's changed, you know, the way I see things and approach things, and my overall worldview. And so I was like, that would be a great thing to talk about, and so we want to do exactly that. Talk about the creators, the ideas, the things that have impacted us in our lives about sci-fi, and of course, we're going to say poets, and so I thought of another P word, and so Dead Padawans, you know.
As opposed to Dead Porg Society?
It could have been Dead Porgs. There is vitriol for the Porgs, but you know, everyone loves the Master Skywalker. What are we going to do? And then Anakin just laying into little kids.
We're that child.
Right. That tells you a little bit about the podcast, that we are going to be...
We don't expect to be here long.
Exactly.
This is why we skipped episode 3. Just like...
Yeah, that's
if you're
really
a Padawan, you stay away.
That's really why we're on episode 4 now, is because we really did not want to have to do episode 3 with this name. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Smart. It's really a smart move.
Right. So yeah, we're talking, and we'll you know, introduce some topics and some ideas, you know, in further podcasts, and we'll do some specific focuses on other episodes. But today, we're just kind of introducing ourselves. My name is Nick. I live in Nashville, along with my friend Brett here.
But we don't live together.
We're just friends, and we both have wives. We did go to college together, but we were not roommates.
No,
so.
In fact, we weren't terribly close until we started working together. So we both work at a publishing house.
No, yeah, you were the guy who was always making movies.
I was too busy for you at that time,
and had your whole crew, and so that goes right into, what does Brett like to do?
Yeah, I am a video producer, so I do video production at a print publishing house, which is a very lonely place to be because everybody else is like, let's type things and write words. And I'm like, pictures. So I do that. I live in Nashville, actually outside of Nashville, and have a wife and currently an 11-month-old. So if you're listening to this anywhere near whenever it's released, He's 11 months old. If not, do the math and you'll find out how old he is. But so being a dad has been awesome. And I'm actually looking forward to introducing Keaton to a lot of the sci-fi stuff that I love.
Oh, yeah. I also have a little girl myself, and that's a big topic we've talked about before is when do you introduce your kid to the properties and the sci-fi that you love? And I'm always afraid that I'm going to do it too early or too late, and it's just not going to hit. Because that was a big part of my childhood was sci-fi.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And I'm going off what you were talking about. I'm actually a graphic designer here. I work at the same place as Brett. I came in and immediately connected with him because, again, a place full of editors and we are creative people, and so I was like, oh, Brett, let's talk.
There's another creative.
Right, yeah. Somebody who works in video, and I do, print and digital art and stuff like that. And so, of course, I went to him, and we started talking, and it's like, wait a minute, we should just do a podcast.
Yeah, this is basically just a continuation of our work conversations.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think, too, it's probably best we're doing this because we spend way too much time talking about this stuff when we probably shouldn't be. So,
shh, our bosses could be listening to this.
Hey, boss.
Hey, boss. Our bosses are not listening to this. Let's be honest.
No,
this is
they're
not in there.
So, well, going back to that, what I mentioned about like earliest sci-fi memories, like when you're a kid growing up. And this is what's going to be get you guys to know a little bit about us. So yeah, I am worried about that. When to introduce my daughter to different sci-fi properties and what to lead into in order to maybe get her interested in some of those stuff.
Having a daughter, I feel like, is probably an even bigger challenge because I think some sci-fi properties just have been masculine. And so our experience is probably going to be different than your daughter's experience. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of sci-fi created by men and focused on men and like really pushing like kind of male themes and stuff like that. Though there is a huge, part of the population who are female and love science fiction, but they also, like, females also get teased more about being a lover of sci-fi. And so that's the thing too, is like it is changing. Like that is changing and like there's people who are becoming a bit more outspoken of, I'm a girl and a geek and I love this stuff. And so that's what I'm hoping to foster in her, that like she loves princesses and she loves, Disney movies and all that jazz. And that's fine. I like that stuff too. But I want to start introducing her to, science fiction stuff of Star Wars and Star Trek and all that and get her, maybe interested in that. And, this is something else that you can like. You can like the princesses. That's fine. Me, myself, I will say I grew up watching all kinds of sci-fi, and we were talking about this not long ago, is what is your earliest like science fiction memory, like what you were introduced to? And the thing is that in my house, my dad loved the science fiction channel Sci-Fi. And
it was so great whenever we were like, the Sci-Fi Channel has changed so much. Like it was
right back in when we grew up, it was all about, they got like the old runs of different shows that were all on different networks and stuff like that, and movies that were sci-fi, and just pulling it all together, and it was in one place, and so you could watch the original Star Trek series, and then followed up by TNG in the next hour, and all kinds of stuff.
Twilight Zone, Planet of the Apes.
Exactly. And of course, movies like Back to the Future and Star Wars and Jurassic Park and like all those, and then like the B movie sci-fi stuff was on there, and it was just it was all cultivated in one space. But now they do a lot of like their own content now, which is, that's what everyone is doing these days, is making their own so they don't have to pay for somebody else's. But so a big question that comes up a lot is, when was the first time you saw Star Wars? When was the first time you watched Star Trek?
I can't remember either of those things. Like they have always been present in my life. So I was born in 86. So at that point, the Star Wars films had all come out already. Of course, TOS was long over. TNG had already started, I think, at that point.
Was it
I may have, or
in the 90s at least?
I think it was
Was
definitely
it
starting. It may have been
late
later
80s?
80s. I was a baby. I'm gonna have to fact check that. So, yeah. So I have memories of like both of those franchises from whenever I was very little. Like I can remember, playing with like toy army men in the floor as the VHS copy of, the like Star Wars films, not official licensed copies, mind you, like where my dad had recorded them from the Sci-Fi Channel whenever they played like the letterbox editions.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember watching those and like sitting and playing with Legos or things in the floor. And so that was super early. I mean, I was a preteen when the prequels came out or started coming out. And so that, again, super early, and I was right there. So I definitely don't remember a time without Star Wars. And both of my parents, in fact, I think my mom may actually like Star Trek more than my dad does. And so so I can remember talking about, we'd watch an episode. One of the great things about Trek is that it introduces ideas. Each week's episode is kind of a small parable. And so I can remember talking with Mom about ideas, real world things, because an episode of TNG, or we watched Voyager a lot. One of those shows had aired, and so I was young but being influenced by watching the Trek series, and so both of them have been present with me for forever.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I can't, like, you're the Star Wars guy between us. Like, you are very
Star Wars.
What did I say?
You said Star Wars.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wrong. Sorry. No, I said Star Trek.
No, you totally said Star Wars.
Oh, man. Okay.
Listeners, please send Nick an email to nickdoesn'tcare@gmail.com if you also heard Star Wars. Yeah, I was looking at him. So, in fact, I am more the Trek fan.
Yes, you are more the Trek fan. See, that's the thing is, like, we're going to be talking about all this stuff, and we're fans of all the science fiction properties, and so there's no, how dare you say Trek here? How dare you say Wars here? We love it all, and we're going to be talking about it all, and we're probably going to be mixing it all in different ways. But yes, you are the big Trek fan, whereas I am the bigger Star Wars fan.
Yeah,
and I've
been to a Trek con in costume, so I think I've got basic street cred
as an Andorian.
However, I just discovered the original air date of TNG was September 28th of 1987.
What?
So
really?
I actually was already alive. There are people out there who I now owe my Star Trek card to because I didn't know the original air date of the show. But so they're like, yeah, you say you're a fan of Star Trek, but you...
It's so synonymous with the 90s, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, the aesthetic is so 90s.
Right. I mean, it's like a tan leather car, like from the 90s is the bridge.
Or like talk show. Like it has a very talk show like feel. Like Oprah could walk onto the set, like the bridge of the Enterprise, and be right at home.
Right. She could be dressed up as what was Whoopi Goldberg's character?
Yeah, Guinan, yeah.
Yeah. Like she walks in, it's like,
and you get a Romulan ale, and you get a Romulan ale. That joke is so old right now.
Yeah, but she'd probably fit very well there because she's always counseling. Picard.
Totally.
Yeah. So, yeah, I grew up. I cannot remember the first time I watched Star Wars because I just always had watched Star Wars. I think before I could even, have a solid memory, I had already watched the original trilogy, like all the way through multiple times, and so. Between that and, what I call the holy trilogies of Indiana Jones and Back to the Future and all of those, I just watched over and over and over as a kid because they're just great, they're great action, fun movies, but they also have, those deeper like sci-fi elements that are very interesting and reel you in. But yeah, so ever since I was a kid, I love that my dad loved the Sci-Fi Channel, and we had it on a lot. It was like every night we came home, ate dinner, watched Wheel of Fortune, and then Sci-Fi Channel went on, and if there was some, Battlestar Galactica or, Trek or whatever was on, we were watching it. And so that was back too in the days where you had your slotted, like, you had your time slots.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, oh, this is when TNG comes on.
Yeah,
so,
remember when time used to matter? Like,
yeah, seriously. Whereas like now we're all just you're like, oh, there's this series I'm gonna get to on Netflix, and I'll just go straight through it. Yeah, so
did you see the special editions in theaters?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my dad took me to see all 3 of the special editions when they were released, and I remember watching A New Hope. We went to the Cinema Dome in Little Rock, Arkansas, that's no longer there. It was this giant screen that was 100. It was curved. It was 180 degrees. It was called the Cinema, or no, 180. It was 150. Sorry, it was the Cinema 150, and it was a curved screen, and it was massive. And so from the outside, it had this dome on it. And so you went in, and it was on that, and it was just huge and of course curved. And so when you're around it, it sort of surrounds you a little bit. And I remember going and watching it there, and I mean, of course, I'd already seen Star Wars, but like I'd seen it so many times that I knew the additions, like, and the changes immediately.
Oh, totally.
When it happened, I'm pretty sure as a kid I missed the Greedo shot first.
I was okay with A New Hope, like the special edition. At the time, Jabba was okay.
Well, yeah, you're just
excited to see Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, and as a kid, you're just like, oh, Jabba, this is a new scene. This is new Star Wars, and you don't know anything about CG. Like, no one knew much about CG back then, but like, especially as a kid, you're just like, oh, he's talking to Jabba. Jabba's there, and there's Boba Fett. Like, Boba Fett's in this movie, and you're just happy, you're excited, and so I saw all 3 of those in theaters, and of course, because completely geeked out and loved it. And I had never seen Star Wars on a big screen until then either, because we had the VHS at home, and if I wanted to watch it, I'd just pop those in. So yeah, okay. So we grew up watching sci-fi, like crazy. So what did the sci-fi genre mean to you growing up? And has it changed today for you? Like, did it have a particular meaning for you then, and what do you think about it today?
I mean, I was a super nerdy kid, so like sci-fi was in a lot of ways an escape. It was, I was thinking about it and thinking about the our inaugural episode, and like a lot of even the cartoons that I watched, like those mid to late 80s cartoons, were very sci-fi oriented. And so like even though it was all fake science, like it was like, let's make up chemical of the week, and the Ninja Turtles are going to get turned back into like pet turtles by the Shredder because the neocopectate gets poured on them or something. Like it was always like, but there was always like it was a very sci-fi thing. Some of the other franchises at that time had partly because of the rules of TV, like you couldn't kill people. So, all the villains are robots. Like, if you go back to 80s cartoons for boys, everything that gets murdered is a robot. So, robots everywhere. You can't shoot real guns, so everything is a blaster in those cartoons, which was kind of awesome. So, there were those types of things.
Well, then there was also, like, when we were kids, the Marvel and DC cartoons. That's when they were having their heyday of X-Men. Like watching, I watched the X-Men and Spider-Man and the Batman original animated series. Like those were like, Will and the idea of X-Men are humans who are changing and turning into mutants, something other. That's very sci-fi right there. And those are concepts, that are very much science fiction of taking something, that's very much in our reality and then changing an aspect of it. To where you still have like one foot in what in reality, but then there's these fantastical elements being added, and that's a lot of what superheroes is adding those fantastical elements. Same thing with I also watched I know that like He-Man was like super big in the 80s, and there's like this cult following for He-Man, which I never watched it.
Me either.
I never.
I'm a little too young.
It was a little bit before us, but another thing that was a little before me was Thundercats though. And I watched the heck out of Thundercats. Like again, I've never seen He-Man. assume it's probably an inferior show to He-Man.
Just based on the clips?
I guess because it has more of a following, but I loved Thundercats. And that's like, the cats, and it's funny because it's fantasy, it's very much like fantasy, but it also had like blended into science fiction as well because they had like spaceships and, they were on this other planet. And I think that was some in He-Man as well. And, kids were being introduced to those like crazy cool concepts.
The imagination that sci-fi allows for has always been super appealing to me. That just the opportunity to explore worlds. And even like one of the things that the prequel trilogy that gets dumped on a lot, it still gets praised for is that it did open up. Lucas was like, hey, let's have a planet with fluorescent plants. And they did it. And, and so for me, like being a kid who was very creative, sci-fi just felt like a ripe place for being creative. Like, oh, a planet where apes talk like people and people are like the cattle. Like, that's great. That's such a creative like twist.
Right.
It's synthesis of things that we know. And so that has always been hugely appealing to me, is that it's a playground almost, like creatively.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking about that too earlier, is that, so much of you as a kid is play. And is you taking your action figures and, making up your own stories because, your mom and dad, unless you're just sat in front of a TV all day, it's you had your toys and you got to go in. And the thing I loved the most is getting Star Wars toys. I had my Millennium Falcon, Power of the Force edition with all the like FX sounds and everything.
Yeah, 5-year-old me is super jealous of you right now.
Yeah, I've seen those Millennium Falcons out there, and they're like somewhere, in a box, like really nice. They're, about like $100, and I really, goodness, I've wanted to drop that money on those so bad because that's like reclaiming my childhood. But but you had the figures, and you could put Han and Chewie in the cockpit and then go and have your own adventure. And so much of sci-fi is doing that, is taking like these characters either existing or coming up with your own, and then putting them in a universe that's different than our own, maybe with some similarities, but really you can just be so far out there. And that's why, even with like George Lucas, him not being as beloved by the greater culture today as what he used to be. He's still a god in nerd fandom, but that's kind of like what he is, because he's like the god of the Star Wars universe. He created it. It follows his rules, and even now with him not being over the series, everything is developed, out of what he originally did, coming up with the Force, coming up with, the rules for the universe and who are the players and how does it all fit together. Yeah. And that, that's one universe that's super expansive, like that it has just grown and grown and grown, and more detail has been added because of people's love for it. That, more people have, along the years come into the company and, come into the fandom and just grown, and added, character. That's what I love about Star Wars probably the most, is that you can get as deep into it as you want.
Oh, yeah.
And like every single character has a name and a backstory and, all these worlds that they're from and who's their race and, all the stuff. Same thing with Star Trek too.
Oh, totally,
is that, they all have these, backstories, and even though it's in some ways an escape, there's things from the real world that are placed into, those characters, and things that are, like archaic understandings of man and who he is and why he acts a certain way and stuff like that. And I think it appeals to so many people, because even though it can be so otherworldly, it still is very much speaking to our core of who we are.
Yeah. Sci-fi lets you explore ideas and situations. Again, being especially a Trek fan, a lot of the situations in Star Trek, though they're happening, in space and in the future, and in a very unrelatable situation, they actually are exploring ideas that are very present. And so, I was exposed to ideas about, different types of people. And even I think part of being a nerdy, weird kid like sci-fi was super appealing to me because I saw characters that were also weird and different, but were embraced in whatever their franchise were. You know, there's like the Reginald Barkley plot line in TNG,
Right.
where you've got somebody who is clearly turned different, you know, arguably on like some kind of spectrum, and he ends up being embraced by the cool main characters of the, and so you get to see through science fiction, through something that's safe and different and apart enough, you can actually explore ideas that are very present. Yeah, I love that about sci-fi.
Yeah, it made me start thinking of characters that are just like so like out there and crazy, but they're fun. Like one of my favorite characters from TNG is Q.
Mm-hmm.
That he's just this omniscient kind of guy who just flashes in, pops up here and there, and is like kind of like Loki, the god of mischief, just just bouncing around, and it's fun stuff like that. Like, I mean, in Star Wars, you have Chewbacca, who from the get is just like, yeah, this is my co-pilot. And
he doesn't speak English.
He doesn't. Yeah, you won't understand him. We all do. He growls, but he's also my mechanic. Like, keeps the ship running, and he flies. Second seat and takes care. But he's an animal. Like, he's a giant Bigfoot.
Totally.
But it's just
Yoda, who is hundreds of years old. I mean, like, that there is a place in science fiction for old people. Like,
yeah.
Like, popular media doesn't include old people very often, or if it does, they're like jokes. Like Everybody Loves Raymond. Like, that's where we keep our old people, except in sci-fi, where they can be the person who like starts you on your journey or introduces you to things that you weren't already aware of. So yeah, the Star Trek idea of like infinite diversity and infinite combinations, like that, you only get that in sci-fi.
Right. Yeah, and Star Trek was big about that too, of just like, from the original series, just a very diverse crew right off the bat, and it's just who we are because the world has, they start with, the world is not at war anymore. All the nations have worked it out, and we're all the human race, and we're expanding out into the far reaches, and so we've got, all these different people on our crew representing, people from all over the world, and that's just it.
Yeah.
It's really, that's one of the, Star Trek is a very, like, optimistic,
Totally.
view of the future, and that's, for its time, was very different.
Yeah, I feel like as a kid too, who, like, I grew up in rural Missouri, and so the world that I was growing up in was very, very small, and I was curious in a bigger way, I think, than what I had access to there. And so sci-fi also, as a kid, just was a good opportunity to explore creative. I mean, almost, you hear about like Einstein's thought experiments where he'd be sitting on a train, but he would be thinking about, like this train in outer space that, traveling at near the speed of light, things like that. And sci-fi opened those types of doors as well, where it's like, oh no, I'm not trapped in the walls of, like fields full of cows that I see around me, but instead, no, the entire universe is open to me exploring through thought and through fiction.
Right. And because let's say like you can be watching just any drama set in our modern world, with some characters who are going through something, and that can be a great piece. You can watch any dramatic movie or even a comedy movie or anything like that, and the rules of the world they're in because it's your world. You can look at the characters and see, kind of how they're acting and kind of get an idea of what kind of person that is. And so those things are kind of given, to where the audience just understands, most of the time there's just a lot of things that are understood, and then you develop your story on top of that and try to, create something really great. But like sci-fi is that foundation isn't there. That these creators, it's funny how I feel sci-fi doesn't, get as much its due respect and love as, some of those other arts like drama and things like that, especially from, the Academy or whatever, authorities in Hollywood or whatever. But it's funny because these creators have to start their own base. They have to create, things that, you know, if you're going out into the unknown, they have to have like those answers for like what's out there and the rules of it and everything like that. And they have to be even more creative as far as like what is it going to be and how are we going to get the audience to understand that and to accept it and to then build characters and story on top of that and tell something, you know, compelling. And so it's like an extra creativity, and it's a extra expanding of your mind into something because it's completely otherworldly. And it's cool because it's literally happening on the screen, but it's like meta happening, you know, within your mind of viewing it, like you're being expanded, like your ideas are being questioned of, you know, what you know, and you know, being able to creatively think what is out there, you know, what is different, you know, and not even just like focusing on like space travel, but just like our reality here. There's a lot of sci-fi that deals with, you know, what if our reality was different, you know, or what if what we thought was reality wasn't, or something happens and it fluctuates and there's a huge, you know, there's a shift, and so now the rules have changed, you know, or how we understand them was wrong the whole time or something like that. And so when that's introduced and then it gets played with, it's super fascinating and interesting, and then it makes the audience have to expand their minds with it, which I love.
As a kid, I'll be honest, the spectacle that is associated with sci-fi was part of the appeal too, though.
Oh, sure.
Like, you know.
right. Yeah. Like these things are happening under the surface.
It's totally like, I've got to be, because there's a part of me that wants to like, you know, wax philosophical about, you know, like,
right.
And
I was drawn to this as a kid because there was something so deep inside me that connected to it. Yeah.
The reason that people like Star Wars is because it actually is the monomyth, you know, like that kind of stuff. And it's like, that's true, and it makes it relatable, but there is a certain amount of just like, dinosaurs are cool and robots are cool and like,
right, and they've got blasters and they're having a shootout in a hole, you know, and then they get to zoom off into a spaceship and blow up a Death Star and
that's awesome.
Right, yeah, and go into a trench run and there's this evil guy with a helmet and he's got some buttons on his chest. Who is this guy? What is he up to? And so there's all these, like, as a kid, so many visual elements that are just blowing you away.
Yeah, and so because of that, I mean, some of the cerebral stuff I really didn't get into. I mean, like, I would say I was more of a Star Wars fan than a Star Trek fan through at least, like, my preteens, probably. Like, I was more drawn to it. Like, if there were one that I had to pick to watch at a given time, like, I probably would have been like, well, let's throw in Star Wars. And it has elements, you know, there are definitely ways that George Lucas was thinking through what he was creating and was consulting with Joseph Campbell. And so those types of things were there. But part of it is just lightsabers are awesome.
Right. Yeah. Well, and even me, like my dad watching, because he was older, you know, and so Star Trek, the more, you know, the deeper, you know, philosophical stuff that happens in it, like he obviously got more out of that as an adult than I did as a kid. I was looking for, you know, when I watched Star Trek with him, it was like, you know, what space battle are they going to get into, or what weird, you know, alien, you know, being that's floating out there in, you know, a cloud outside and is going to attack the whole ship at once and stuff like that. Like, and I loved seeing the visuals of that, and you know, they had their phasers and all that stuff too. And so, and of course the holodeck. I mean, come on. Yeah. What kid is not going to like the holodeck? Because that's what go back to play. It's like, oh, it's adults having imaginative play too. Like, in there.
Like, see, guys, I'm right.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty fun. And so, but that's, of course, when you're a kid, that's what, you know, you're focusing on. But all those other things are seeping in. And when you revisit them, you know, as an adult, you're like, man, this is really deep stuff. Like, I understood as a kid, like, what the theme, you know, was and what they were saying, but, you know, as an adult, of course, that has deeper impact because of, well, this is what they're saying, and of course, like, how does this connect to my world and what is happening and what people are going through and stuff like that.
Yeah, it actually is cool that, and even Because I've went back and watched, like Ninja Turtles, the 80s cartoon, like numerous times as an adult. Whenever they dropped them on DVD, I was like, yes! And went back and watched them. And there's a lot of stuff that clearly was just there for kids. And there are a lot of ways that it's very dismissible. But you also see a lot of deeper ideas that get, presented even in children's works that would fit under like the sci-fi banner. And so it is cool that the previous bearers of the torch thought it was important enough that they didn't just, because there's some cartoons you go back and watch and you're like, oh, this is awful, like why was I into this? And it's cool that some of the things that we were interested in that were science fiction whenever we were children, they actually continue to have value as adults. I think that's been awesome.
Yeah, here's something fun to do. Get on YouTube and watch any episode of Power Rangers.
Oh.
And see how bad it is.
Yeah.
Like, no offense to the Power Ranger fans out there, but man, I went back a couple of years ago and I was like, I used to watch Power Rangers like
totally,
crazy. Yeah, I mean, because going back to a kid, like there's explosions and giant monsters and giant robots like fighting each other and karate and all that
and
jazz.
Cool teenagers.
Right, yeah.
With attitude.
Exactly. Like they're just hanging out at the mall, and then Rita Repulsa attacks and so, but yeah, going back maybe I'm summing up a whole show and shouldn't be, but it's like, did that have any message? I can't remember.
I mean, it had a lot of the cursory like messages that you give children,
right.
It's important to work together as a team.
Yeah,
and
they did that. They would do that little like tag of
at the end where one of the Rangers would come out and be like, you need to be a good citizen.
Right. Or there was like some, drama happening at school.
Yeah. That became the monster, right?
Right, exactly. And it's like, it's a good thing we worked together and went, got over our differences and whatever was happening before. So, yeah. But even with that, I'm sure there was good things, and ideas that seeped in. Okay, so what is, if we're talking about, different things that science fiction has done and the things that it's explored. So what is your favorite, like some of the favorite sci-fi themes and ideas that get explored?
Wow, that's a deep question. Have you ever noticed how when people don't have an answer to a question, they will immediately go to, that's a good question. That's deep. I like that.
Good question.
It's because they don't have any idea how to answer, and they should have thought about it before the interview and didn't.
Well, I wrote down a few.
That was smart. And while you're answering your own question,
I did my prep.
I'll be coming up with a few of my own.
A sci-fi theme. One of the ones I really like, life origin. So,
how so?
Yeah, like there's different sci-fi properties that that go into like the origin of like humanity or consciousness or the universe and stuff like that. That is just like because a lot of times in most genres of film and TV they don't deal with that. Stuff. It's
true.
Just,
that's true.
This is a crime procedural. Like, we're not talking about, the cosmos. Like, we're not talking about, this is, the deep, things of existence. But sci-fi, like Star Trek will go there. They'll, why does God need a starship? Like, or sending Voyager out and V'ger comes back and they have I'm talking movies now, but then it all ends up in this questioning of the origins of of life and what is consciousness, and I guess the examples I've given are very broad, but even like understanding like what is consciousness, we get that a lot with AI movies.
That's very true.
And stuff like that. So the origin of life there of is something sentient or not, if it can pass a Turing test or if it can fool you, is it alive? Is Data alive?
Ooh. We should have an episode just about this.
This is an episode of Is Data.
Is data
We'll do point and counterpoint, and we'll just argue of if data is.
Here's the issue
sentient.
with that. That actually is already an episode of TNG. I think.
Okay, I'm not.
I think Measure of a Man is the title of that episode, which is weird that I can pull out the episode title, but yeah. I think basically Data is put on trial to determine whether or not he's whether he's property or a person. Basically is the idea.
Okay, so like a really intricate Turing test.
Yeah, and I think maybe Picard has to argue come to his defense.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Of course he's going to be the one arguing for his life.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love life origin, anything that has to do with that
for me that theme is a little tricky because when it's done well and done thoughtfully, and especially in terms of just what constitutes answering that question more, what constitutes intelligence or what constitutes what we would see as life.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like those are really great. Episodes like Devil in the Dark, the TNG or TOS, where they're down in these caves and there's this silicone-based life form, and they're like, is this some kind of animal? And they come to find out that it's actually a sentient being. That's super cool. Exploring that kind of stuff. I feel like historic origins, sci-fi sometimes is really spotty at successful because that's just such a deep topic to
it's a lot to handle.
Yeah, it's and so you end up with we're all the races of the universe are from one civilization that put their DNA on all the
seeded
planets.
Life on Earth and
and it's that's an interesting
they kind of look like humans. There's some of their aspects, but you can tell we made it our own here.
Yeah, which I think that happens in the Alien franchise too, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's specifically what I was thinking about with I think it was Prometheus that happens in one of the was Architect or something like that. Yeah.
So
it has to come to Earth.
When done well, that theme is great. I feel like
we're not saying anything about Prometheus.
It's a really deep theme to explore.
Right.
And that's the thing. I mean, I feel like this is going to be the case with every theme that we talk about. But if a theme is given due respect by the creator, and they've actually thought through the different sides of it and have done their research, then they can really address something like that well and interestingly, and if they haven't,
well, we're gonna get into that a little bit later, and I feel that's very telling of if you've wrestled with it can show. If you haven't enough, it also shows. Time. That's another.
I mean, time is almost its own subgenre, and I love it.
Yeah, it really is. And every well, I guess not every, but a lot of sci-fi franchises, that have consecutive movies or shows. They deal with time at some point of going back and changing something or.
Well, that's one of the foundational concepts in science fiction. I mean, you go back to the works of. Was it Wells, the Time Machine? I mean, that's one of the seminal early works of science fiction, and it is totally there from the beginning. So Yeah, what
would it do to you if you jumped into the past and changed something? How would it affect you? How would it affect the world? Or Time Machine, jumping way into the future to see how it all turns out, and what's happened, and the moon is broken, and crazy stuff like that.
Well, and so much science fiction already has a leg in time travel, even if it's not a time travel story. If it's about the future, then you as the creator are already having to kind of make that mental jump.
You're taking the audience out of time.
Yeah. And so
placing them in a
easy
weird
step
place.
to say, well, let's move our character to that place.
Right, yeah.
And temporal paradoxes are so great. The puzzle that is created by time as it's treated in science fiction. It's such a fun thing to try to wrap your brain around and slowly get a headache over.
Right. Yeah. Well, and going back to like degrees of quality in sci-fi, and this goes back to something I said before, is like sci-fi can sometimes look as a lesser genre, and I think maybe that sometimes has to do with all of the C and D like type sci-fi movies that take some of these concepts, don't really think them through, want to throw something like out there, to be, we're going to mess with time. We're going to go back and we're going to do this, and it's going to be crazy adventures and stuff like that, where it just doesn't logically make any sense whatsoever. And any rational person would be like, this would just fall apart. Like, this doesn't make any sense. But then when it's done, when it's done either very well, or at least the person, you can tell, has put in, the thought into it of maybe if you don't agree that it would, it would work, you could at least like see, that they really put the effort into understanding, what it means to put somebody out of time or to change something in time. I think of like Looper, like that movie of, the director of Sting. He just did Star
Rian
Wars.
Johnson.
Rian Johnson, yeah. That he like wrestled with the ideas of that and like, went through, well, if this happened, then what would happen? What could be the, foreseeable causes of this kind of technology being in place and these kind of people using it and stuff like that. And that stuff is just, that's what I love. I love interesting like takes on that, especially when it's like technology in the hands of regular
That's great. Yeah.
people, like or of people who are going to use it for nefarious purposes, or something like that. Not what it's like, the technology built and being used for not what it was intended to, or being changed to where it's worse, or it's doing something evil. I love that. That's always interesting. Perception of reality.
Is this podcast even real?
Are you, the listener, even real? The things that you touch, are they really there? But not even perception of reality of like the Matrix of, do we exist, or is anything really tangible, or like the existential like questions. But like I love any sci-fi that plays with changing at least like one person's like reality, or something is revealed to them that then makes them question like everything that's come before, like question themselves, like such as like Blade Runner, where the idea is put forward of the replicants and who is one, you know what I mean? There's a test that they have to determine if you are one, but can you beat, like, can the test be beaten, and maybe you not realizing that you are one. Same thing has been recently been done. Well, I mean, Blade Runner came back, but also been done in Westworld. They have all of these, robots in the park, but there's also a lot of human characters in the show as well, but not all the human characters, spoiler alert, are human characters. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like,
what?
Yeah. Who would have thought that would have come in that type of show if you haven't seen Westworld? But like, it's
ruined it for me, Nick.
Yeah. It's of course put forward of, these characters who you thought were human, these characters who they thought they were human, but then turns out that, they're not. And then the repercussions of that, of what does that mean for their entire history of what they think they know and what has been programmed or something like that. Goodness, I love that stuff. What about you?
Yeah. Well, now that I've had a few moments to think about your great question, great question. One of my favorite themes, and you're actually wearing the shirt of one of my earliest favorite, and those of you who are listening are like, he's wearing a shirt. That's good to know. Thank you for that. It's an important detail.
I wasn't on episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I know. It was a little awkward. It's kind of a Kylo Ren moment.
I was trying to get comfortable.
Yeah.
It's a new
Well,
podcast.
I am more comfortable now. You're wearing a Jurassic Park shirt and like have loved Jurassic Park for forever. And one of the interesting things that film explores is the idea of should we do everything that we can do? And so sort of like the ethics of science. I think that's really interesting, and fiction allows for that because there's certainly, you know, within the realm of science, there are many, many things that are possible. But should we ethically do those things? And again, that's one of those types of themes that's super, super deep. And if an author hasn't put the right work into it, or a creator hasn't really put, you know, the time into wrestling with the idea, it can be very shallow. But whenever it's done well, I think it makes you think about things in your life that are ethical situations. And so I enjoy ethics as a theme. I also really love the fish out of water in science fiction. And as a Trek fan, one of my favorite Trek movies is Galaxy Quest, right? Because it's totally a Star Trek movie. Like, it just is. Those of you who disagree, you're welcome to, but you're wrong. Those people are angry at me now. They're like, well, we're not listening to this podcast anymore. Like, Brett guy, whatever. But no, I love Galaxy Quest because it's a great example of this, where you take people who are not prepared for a sci-fi situation. Sometimes it's time travel. But in that situation, these people do not realize that the show that they were on is actually real out in the cosmos, and they get pulled into it. And so I love whenever you get a situation where, and it works well in fiction too, because then they become the vehicle for the audience. And so that's huge, where, you know, Last Starfighter's kind of that way, where you've got this kid who his world completely changes. And so, you know, how are they going to cope with that? How can you potentially bring things from your life that are actually going to help the situation? So, you know, if there are a bunch of actors now piloting a starship, is their ability to perform as an actor going to help them in that situation? And so that's interesting. And then, you know, just thinking through the ramifications of what we are, you know, doing in our lives, and is, you know, as an actor, am I actually a liar? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Is there value in what I'm doing? Because that's funny. It's a comedy movie, but it's also sci-fi, and they're doing just that. They think they're has-beens. They think what they've done before, like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. They're just going to these small cons, and then they go out into the galaxy using the skills that they learned on the show, and then seeing that they still have value.
Oh, absolutely.
And then coming back to the real world, coming back to the normal, the mundane, and then having like a rejuvenated spirit, because, you know, not only it wasn't just what happened out there that changed them, but it's what they brought with them.
Absolutely.
And what they brought back, and realizing that, you know, they had some things even before they went that they, you know, still have and can be of value and of use in life. Yeah.
Probably a third theme, and I don't know if this even is a theme necessarily. One of the things I really enjoy about science fiction thematically is that it allows you to explore themes of other literature. So I do video production now. I actually taught for 4 years, and before that I studied English. So, like, doing literary analysis is part of what I studied. And so I really enjoy when a work of science fiction takes on a literary theme. So whatever it may be, you know, man versus machine, or the ideas that we've talked about, fathers and sons is a huge one, you know, anytime in Star Wars is, you know, that, but like the relationship between those types of things, but things that are super, super grounded that you wouldn't think of as a sci-fi theme when sci-fi puts its stamp on it, or even does something interesting because of the world that's created that you couldn't do with just a straightforward drama set in our world. I love those types of films.
Yeah, because they introduce the fantastical, which immediately raises the stakes for, like, going back to Jurassic Park, like the ethical, ideas of if should we do something because we can, and so then just dropping, like Ian Malcolm said, you've dropped a genetic power, you've had it dropped in your lap, and you are standing on giant shoulders in order to do something, and not questioning if you should or not, and so for the audience who lives in, just the average world of the decisions, that I'm making day to day, they don't seem, that big or that they amount to much. But then you take them into, you add this one fantastical element and you show them that your ethics that you currently have matter, because if you then had to deal with this thing that happened, how would you respond to that? How would a normal person respond to that? And it's normal people that you're seeing in going to the park of who, even though they're professionals in the field of paleontology, they crumble into being kids because they are seeing a dinosaur for the first time. And so it's like everything, their expertise and everything is like stripped away because they're in a situation that it's like they're kids again. They're like anybody would react. It's a dinosaur in front of me, and what do I do in response to that? And so I love that in sci-fi too. Is how does humanity respond to this? And there's a lot of great ways that sci-fi will sneak in things that are actually very rooted in our world, but they put a different label on them, and so you're like, well, obviously that, and so but obviously we would take care of that, and we would do this, and we would make that work out, and everything would be fine. But it's the idea of bringing it back to our world, and do we actually do that?
One film that's themes are run super deep, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Deals with very, very human themes. It's a sci-fi movie. I mean, it's in the Star Trek franchise. You can't say that it's not science fiction. But the themes of dealing with death, like how do you cope with or deal with the unwinnable situation, revenge, those types of things, those are super basic human themes.
Regret for your past mistake that has now come to roost.
Yeah. And those things, like you said, they're elevated because now they're set on this stage where the person who's seeking revenge, he also has a doomsday weapon.
Right.
Like how do you cope with those types of things? And so I love that. And then that leads into the themes of that film play into Search for Spock, where if there's a way to bring someone back, do you do that? Let's explore kind of like ideas even beyond that. So, all
right, one last one before we wrap up and talk about just a few small things. For one last sci-fi theme that I really love, First Encounters. I love maybe that's not a theme, but just like a setting the stage.
You know what? We're saying it's themes, so listeners,
it's a theme.
It's a theme now.
Well, it's at least something that has happened a lot in sci-fi of the first encounter with something other. It doesn't have to be an alien, but it could be
like Abyss is that way, where you're
right. Yeah, something that's very a part of our world. Anytime. Like people, like mutants or something like that. There's something changing and it's very new. And then how do we respond to the other, or how do we respond to the new? I love that stuff because that runs the gamut of all the human reations of
because you inevitably have that person who's like, let's shoot it with a gun.
Exactly. And like the old movie, the black and white movie with the metal man. Oh, how am I forgetting?
Day the Earth Stood Still?
Day the Earth Stood Still, right? Yeah, that's, going way back of, that's played through science fiction for so long of, you've got the military presence there, and you've got, the metal man who's, a threat, who they think is a threat, but is really just a bodyguard, and, all this, how would we react? Coming, from there all the way up to, like, Arrival, that movie that just came out, of how the world would respond to something like that. Same thing with like the X-Men movies. How people respond.
Yeah, and I feel like in a lot of those situations, you get a little bit of the angst that people who don't have power feel in those situations, because inevitably the people with power a lot of times are the ones making the decisions, and so in science fiction, so often those are the people with the guns, and so it's like the let's fight this is counterpointed with the people who are like, no, wait a second, have we tried to talk to it first? Like, can we?
Right. How many science fiction creators are writing their frustration out with the people who are in power of, this is how you would respond to this situation?
Oh, totally, yeah.
And even though we didn't have discourse and like understanding and empathy for other people, but you're in power and you're just making these radical things, and this is how you would respond to this, and you would end the world because of it. You would be the problem or something like that. And so I wonder how many angry writing that into something. But of looking at what's broken in humanity, and what on the opposite side is uplifting, and what humanity has to offer. Because I also love the sci-fi first encounters where a race is coming because humanity actually has something to offer as well. I love Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like, I love that movie. It came out the same year as Star Wars, A New Hope, and it was super overshadowed, by that franchise, but is an amazing classic that I love rewatching, because it has the horror elements of it. First off, when like the first contact of people reacting in fear, and people being abducted and having these weird experiences, and these flashes of memories and crazy things happening all over the world.
Sculpting mashed potatoes
and realizing it's a mountain, and all of that. I love it because you don't know where it's going. Like, you don't know, is this ending in doom, or is it ending in something greater, or just what's going to happen? And then you finally get to that mountain, and it's just this. It's beautiful. It's like one of the most beautiful like first alien encounters of like humans and them conversing through music, and all of them coming out, all the aliens coming out and bringing Dreyfus into the ship and stuff like that. So yeah, and then that's the idea of like of discourse, of communication happening between the two, and what that would be like, and what could happen if more than one race got together. And I think that's rooted in because our world is so fragmented. What if the different nations and races and peoples from different backgrounds and thoughts like came together? I think that's very prevalent in that's a theme as well.
There's a lot of hopefulness in science fiction, which I think is great. I think there's a certain...
It's not all dystopian all the time.
And there are a lot of people who I think of science fiction just as either like monster movies or dystopian futures or like things like that at its worst. And sometimes the blockbusters are that. Like, people want to see the explosions. And so that's what creators have given them a lot of times, especially on bigger scale. But like smaller sci-fi pieces really offer such a hopeful view of what could be, and just that kind of hopefulness towards the goodness that even humanity potentially can have, I think is an awesome theme, and something that really sci-fi is uniquely able to capture and share.
And I think that still has an audience, even though there's so many tentpole blockbusters out these days, and it's in cinemas all the time. There's always a big, movie with big CGI effects and stuff like that. But then, like, going back to what I mentioned before, like Arrival comes in and, makes a big splash in the sci-fi community and in theaters. I think it did pretty well. And it was low key, like very little spectacle. It was just really focused on presenting. It presented new ideas about consciousness and time travel
and language.
Yes, and stuff like that. That was super fascinating. It wasn't a lot of shock and awe, and
it was very beautiful though.
Yeah.
So the spectacle, I'd say there's still spectacle.
That's true. Oh man, it was beautifully shot. Yeah, but then it wasn't
the kind of spectacle that a lot of tentpole blockbusters have.
Right. It wasn't the flashbang awe. It really drew you in and presented a really cool concept and fleshed it out. And by the end of it, and of course also dealing with the first arrival themes of how would we respond, and then by the end of it, it's a very like beautiful like ending and has a really poignant message that anyone could connect to, like anyone with a family, anyone with a life that they cherish and have value in, can grasp onto. And so I love like.
No spoilers there, though. It may have a theme about people who are important to you.
There's a good theme. There's a good theme.
Yeah, there's a good theme.
So go, if you haven't seen it, see it. It's great. I think it's on Amazon right now.
I mean, hopefully everything we talk about, people will go see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hopefully some of the things we talk about we'll go see.
Yeah, right.
Which is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about last is what are some of the gaps in your science fiction? What are some of the things that you haven't seen?
Nick, what are you talking about? We're the experts here.
We have a podcast, and so of course we are the super nerds that have seen
everything
and know everything about sci-fi.
Yeah, I haven't 3 or 4 times misspoken and said the wrong thing. Like the any reference I've made to Star Trek, I'm sure somebody was like, "You were incorrect about that, sir." Like,
that is not the appropriate episode. You're thinking of this one.
Yeah. So. Doctor Who is a huge gap that I have in my sci-fi view. And I'm not just talking 60s Doctor Who either. I straight up have only seen like 2 or 3 episodes of Doctor Who, period.
Yeah, and for you listeners who are hoping I'm going to save it, I've also not seen hardly any. I've seen a season and a half of the new series. But didn't get past that. It wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. My wife and I just kind of fell off of watching it. I was enjoying it, pretty well, but that's a super popular sci-fi series that I have not seen. Okay, I don't know if you've seen this or not, and I'm ashamed to see this, and it's in my queue. Battlestar Galactica, the new series.
I have not seen all. I've seen some of it. But I have not seen all of it. And I know that's one of those, because of the storytelling in it, you have to see all of it.
Right, because it's like,
super
it's
serialized.
It's only 4 seasons, because I just put it on Hulu to watch, and I was like, oh, it's only 4 seasons. That's pretty good. And yeah. That's one that I had seen episode here and there on TV, and I was like, I like this. This is pretty good. It's not this, it got this, idea of, the super nerds and the weirdos watch it. But, I mean, it was well done, good TV. And so I was like, I really should check this out, but I just never have gotten to it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that I would love to watch all the way through, and then we can talk about that as well.
Yeah. I have not seen a lot of like classic B movies. I've seen a few, and so I mean enough to be conversive, but that's something I don't know how much of a gap it is, and for the people who may end up in our audience, they may be like, they may either think that's horrible, or they may be like, nobody watches those movies, but like a lot of the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman and stuff like that.
Right.
I've seen a couple of the Godzilla films, stuff like that. I would love to see more of those. So
Yeah, it's funny because like there's some going back to the themes. There's some big sci-fi themes that have been introduced, in those old B movies and other materials like that, or in sci-fi books.
Yeah.
From that same time of those were like the first time those were really being explored and given to a mainstream audience, and so those have value for because a lot of things that come after. That's the one thing too that I have a trouble with is like when I've been watching all kinds of different sci-fi and know a lot of these themes and stuff that we talked about, going back to the original person, I often find it like, okay, it's okay, but it's like this is the origin, like this is where
it's been riffed on so many times,
right? Because in
the
people
first
have added
incarnation
to
of it seems naive or simple
or basic, because it's just been riffed and expanded on and added to, and all that beforehand. But those also have value. So,
any other gaps in?
I mean, I love, like, I've seen the episodic, a lot of the episodic sci-fi series other than Battlestar. Like I used to watch, because we watched the Sci-Fi Channel Farscape. Like I used to watch.
Wow, I have not seen
Farscape. I
think I've seen an episode.
Farscape was pretty good. I liked it. It was out there. My mom hated it. She's like, "What are y'all watching?" But my dad and I would watch it, and it had a lot of Muppets in it too. Like Jim Henson, had his crews, working on that, and so there's different Muppet characters and stuff like that. Which someone who loves Star Wars is like, "Oh yeah, I love give me more of that kind of stuff." But that and like Firefly. And like the Die Hard series, I think we talked about this the other day. I haven't seen one second of Babylon 5.
I've seen 1 second of it. I can remember my mother at least watching it, but it's one of those things like it was on in the background.
Yeah,
there were some interesting things in it. Babylon 5 to me is surprising because it has a bigger fan base than you would think. I was in line for Star Wars Episode 7, and I was just talking with the people who I was there with, and we were talking about different sci-fi properties and talked about, I was like, well, one of my favorite Trek series is Deep Space Nine. And somebody else in the line was like, it was just a Babylon 5 ripoff. I'm like, whoa, I didn't expect to see a Babylon 5 fan here, but...
You're like, are you being ironic? Or is that like what you really think?
Evidently, there's some bad blood there.
Interesting.
And the thing is, like, that show has several, like, spin-offs and films and things like that it's a bigger franchise than I thought it was. In fact, there's a series, Crusade, that I got into that I didn't realize was connected to Babylon 5 until, like, after the fact. Like, I watched it years later. It was originally like on a Sci-Fi Channel marathon or something, and watched through it there, and I was like, oh, this is super fun, and then come to find out it's part of the Babylon 5 universe. So
see, that's one of those sci-fi properties that's kind of just like faded into the past. I'm sure, like you say, there's a big fan base still there, but there's not currently anything kind of being done with it, and so it's almost like the same thing with Farscape too. It's kind of like just faded into the past a little bit, and I wonder if it will ever have like a resurgence within either having some sort of reboot or just fan appreciation, grassroots. It just becomes popular again. So that kind of thing happened with Firefly. Like it was very limited people had watched it, and there was kind of a cult following of it when it was on, but after it was done and after they canceled it way too early, after all that had happened, then people started watching it. I never saw it when it was on. I saw it in college when a buddy of mine was like, you have to watch this show with me. And I saw it there, and I was like, this is amazing. And I was like, it's so good. And then it was over. Because I was like, no, wait, why? Why would they do that? It's like they canceled it. When? Years ago.
Yeah.
It's like there's no hope.
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is the worst. And so, but that's had a huge following afterward. And so you never know when something will come back around. But anyway, we talked about the things that we haven't seen. I've never, and one more before we wrap it up. One more is
this is a no judgment zone, by the way.
Yeah, but please no judgment. I've never seen any of the Alien movies other than Covenant or not Covenant, Prometheus.
Yep.
Not a single one.
You're that guy.
I haven't seen 1, 2, 3. Was there one after 3?
I believe so.
Is there a 4?
I think there was a 4th one.
Oh my goodness. I saw Prometheus because it wasn't really even an alien movie. I think I went into it because I was like, it's Ridley Scott, but it's not. I went into it as like, it's not, an alien movie, and so I won't be ruined on, what happened before, because I want to get around to watching this sometime. And then it turned out, it is an alien movie.
Yep.
It's connected in the universe, and and then I haven't seen the newest one, Covenant. I haven't seen that one either. So that's one that we will be getting to, because we'll want to talk about the Alien franchise, of course, on this podcast. And so I will have to watch it at least,
At least for that. Yeah.
At least one at a time. Like we're going to talk about Alien or Alien and Aliens, and I'll have to do that.
Well, I'm really looking forward to, as a result of the podcast, filling in some of those gaps or exploring things that I haven't looked at or haven't thought about before.
Oh, yeah. And
that's a great opportunity.
Like I said, in prep for this, I've been going through like Hulu and Netflix and seeing just what they have, and finding stuff that I knew was there too, like the Twilight Zone. I haven't watched the Twilight Zone in so long, and I'm like, I know this is really good, and I know that I can kind of reminisce and remember some of these episodes that I watched, and probably see some that I've never even seen before because they randomly came on television. You just caught what you caught. So I was like, I put that on my queue on Netflix because I was like, I want to just watch the Twilight Zone all the way through and enjoy that, because I know it's good.
Yeah.
And so that'll be something. We'll come in, and from time to time you'll have something or I'll have something that we're watching, and we can or reading or a game that we're playing or something like that, and come and bring it in and talk about
books and games would be
an
area where I'm sure I have some gaps, especially like video gaming. Because there are a lot of sci-fi properties there that, I'll be honest, since about the PS2, my video gaming has been, I became an adult and didn't have time for that. Like, I had to make choices, not that,
Right, yeah, I did the same thing.
Love to have played if I had like, unlimited time, but...
Yeah.
Whenever you get a wife, she gets down on those kinds of things.
There's only so
audience. I
much
have an awesome wife, though, so don't get me wrong. I'm not
first episode thrown under the bus.
I'm not throwing my wife under the bus.
Yeah. Well, so another thing too is we'll be kind of dependent a little bit on our listeners as well. If you guys, if there's something that we're not talking about, or something that you would really like us to look into, send us an email or something like that, and we can look into gaps in our sci-fi knowledge and love for the properties and stuff like that. Yeah, send it on. We'd love to hear.
They can reach us at deadpadawansociety@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, just email us there and yell at us for getting all kinds of things wrong, and tell us some things that you enjoy. And
yeah, well, and since this is episode 4, we actually already have a mailbag ready. Like, we've already gotten some listener responses.
Oh, someone listened to 1, 2, and 3 that we didn't do.
Yeah, already in the future. Well, time traveler. Let's see. We've got an email here from a Dr. Lazarus, who said, "By Grabthar's hammer. What a great show."
Oh, see, that's so nice to hear.
That's really nice.
I'm just gonna leave it there because that was positive.
Oh, just end on a positive note.
So now I thought this was going horribly, and now that I have that, I'm gonna do another one. Heck, let's do another one.
All right.
Yeah. Well, we thank you guys for tuning in and listening to us, and we will be back very soon with another episode of Dead Padawan Society.
Thanks for listening. Live long and prosper.
And may the Force be with you, always.